That's for sure.
I like him. I like it when people have passion for something.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Well, look, thank you for joining today, Jim, Willem from Team Ashby. It'd be great to kick off with a kind of quick intro and sort of understand your roles at Ashby and what you do, and maybe sort of in a bit more detail than people often get online.
Yeah. Shall I kick off?
Why not?
Well, I've been recruiting my whole career, so went from recruiter to had a talent and found out about Ashby quite early on in their journey. So implemented Ashby when it was just an ID, really. And Benji, the founder of Ashby.
Which customer were you? What customer number?
Number 7.
Number 7.
Of
Right.
all-in-one, and we had some analytics customers. But I was the biggest one back in the day. It was like 250 people. Most of our companies were 10.
Was this van move?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So, but Deal was a customer, for instance. Like they were 6 people. And I found out about Ashby through Deal because I was being paid by Deal as one of the first freelancers on that platform. So that was actually quite funny. Matt Benji believed completely in what he was trying to achieve. Also, kind of like his hiring manager. You've probably in our improbable days you've worked with these hiring managers that you just love. I think that's also what Benji is, kind of like super well prepared, thinks about the operation, wants to help. So when he was, when he pitched me what he was trying to build, I said like, even if you don't have it today, let's build it together. So that was kind of like the kickoff. Implemented Ashby, loved it so much. Joined early, first EMEA, non-eng hire, did a lot of sales. So go to market, which I loved. Then we hired far better people than me to do that job. Now I run the community, hiring my second person here, and I also took up a lot of education stuff. So I think my main goal is to make people successful in Ashby, and I think Ashby is obviously a wide product with 4 or 5 products in one. So yeah, trying to get the community together to learn from one another, finding kind of like champions to present their use cases, etc. I think that's what I always missed when I was in TA, kind of like a vendor that kind of like also brought me people that I could talk to, learn from, etc. So that's also what I'm trying to build. So basically what I do is making sure that Ashby Ashby users are well connected through our ecosystem and learn from one another.
That's really cool. And obviously our connection is way back when at Improbable,
Yeah.
back in 2016, something like that.
I turned 2014.
14, yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Very early days. Those were good times.
Number 30, I think. Yeah.
Love that. And Jim, we'd get to hear a bit more about you.
Well, Willem also spends his part-time overseeing what we're doing in the people team and just correcting all of our mistakes and so on, because he has so much time on his hands. So I'm Jim. I lead the people team at Ashby, both functions, both the human resources side of things and the TA side of things. And I've been in the TA space for 25 years now. In fact, I started just around the corner from here in Barbican in my agency days. But I was the first IC technical recruiter at Google in London when we opened the development centre, and I was hired. I think the first engineer was on training in Mountain View, so we had to build all of that out from scratch. And then I ran rest of the world sourcing out of London, then took a global role leading global inbound, so 4 million applications a year coming through my team there. And I was on the design team of Google's in-house ATS, G-Hire, back in 2011. And I'd put my first ATS in 2003. I'd kind of been put in charge of the recruiting side of implementation of an agency ATS. So I've had this constant theme of people, process and technology throughout my time in TA. I wore a systems and product hat for about a decade at Google. Was on LinkedIn's advisory board. LinkedIn, similar profiles, that piece of functionality is them coming into our team in London and replicating some of the manual work that we were doing at Google in London, which is kind of fun. And then I left Google and joined Full Story, a startup based out of Atlanta in the US. I live in Georgia now. And I was really surprised at the TA tech stack and what was out there and just how fractured it was. Then I discovered Ashby and I became an Ashby Analytics customer in 2021 and then put Ashby all-in-one in place. I think I was the first big customer after the general release in September of 22 and fell in love with the product. And then with the global economy crashing, I pitched myself for a role that didn't exist. And thankfully, Benji said, "We hoped you'd ask." So I joined Ashby almost 2.5 years ago. So thank you for your vote of confidence. Willem was one of my interviewers. And not only do I do the traditional people ops role there and also lead the TA function, but I get to be involved in conversations around the product, the direction we're going in, the functionality. I get to test, have a stopwatch on my desk. I get to play with all the technology and poke holes. Latency. I grew up at Google. Larry Page used to stand outside the windows of internet cafes and say, this isn't loading fast enough, and fire off a memo back to the engineering team, make it faster. So one of my first looms I sent to Benji was recording me reviewing 30 resumes and showing him how long that took because there was some latency in loading the next CV. And then that went off to an engineer, and then they cut what was 3 seconds down to 0.1 of a second.
I think I started running a candidate report in Greenhouse about a year ago, and it should be finished in a couple of weeks.
That's the kind of thing that frustrates the user, and I get to give that feedback directly into the team. So I love that. I'm constantly looking at breaking records and using comparative data. For example, my record for CVs reviewed in a day is 1,600 on one role whilst doing my day job. Whereas I used to lead that function at Google, and an individual whose core job it was to do that, their target was 2,500 in a week. And that's the magnitude of difference thanks to current technology. So it's exciting times that we're in, and I get to play right at the centre of it in TA.
Love that. It is an exciting time. I think I'll spare everyone my intro because I'm far less interesting than both of you. But it is an interesting time in TA. Like, I think there's been certain waves of technology. We've had the kind of you had the sort of the legacy systems. I think then you had the emergent sort of startups in that most recent wave. The Levers, the Greenhouses, there were a few more as well in there as well. And then I think you guys were a bit later than that wave. And there's been another sort of emergence of tools, sort of AI first tools there. I guess like when you survey the landscape from the position of being a serious player in the TA tech world, what do you see as the most exciting changes, the most exciting things emerging on the horizon?
I think from my perspective, it's the two sides of the employee-employer engagement piece. From the employee perspective, it's really exciting. You've got this accessibility to work thanks to the remote work revolution caused by the pandemic, or driven by the pandemic, accelerated. So that's really interesting that people have got access to jobs that perhaps they wouldn't have had access to before. So that's fascinating. And then you've got the democratization of skills piece from AI augmenting the human and giving them capabilities that they wouldn't have had beforehand. So when you think about it from a hiring perspective, you've got broader skilled employees thanks to technology. Mm-hmm. And you flip that round to the other side, to the core TA work and how companies engage with future employees. We've never really had the capability to scale experience properly, and now that's within reach. And what I mean by that is it's not just the candidates who do well and get all the way through the process, it's the folks that you're rejecting. Within the last couple of months, we've released AI-driven feedback tokens so that every candidate you're rejecting can get some feedback at scale that's meaningful and constructive, positive and negative. And TA teams have never had the capability to do that before. So technology is changing the narrative of the engagement between employer and potential employee across all different levels. But of course, there's the volume change as well, and then people with AI resumes coming in and the technology to balance all of this. So it really is fascinating and exciting all at the same time.
For me, what I see, obviously in this wave, is a lot of founders coming in trying to fix recruitment without recruitment background. I think that's always fascinating to see kind of how they balance kind of like, oh, this is a $1 trillion industry. It has so much manual stuff going on. Let's just AI the crap out of this thing. And I don't think that works. I still see, if I look at all the AI companies that are kind of like doing well, I think 90% of them are on Ashby. They still, you still have a process that you need to follow. So what I'm really excited about is kind of like the stuff that we've shipped, and an AI feedback token is one of them. I've been using them in kind of like not just to reject people, but also to give feedback during the interview process.
Oh, interesting.
So, a lot of people think like, oh, feedback is for rejection, but it's also kind of like to enrich your own journey with hiring, right?
There's something that Wise did really well. I don't know if they still do it, but they used to do it. Whereas through the process, you'd have check-ins with the recruiter, and they would give you pretty direct feedback, as is their culture, as was their culture, as I understand it, about your performance so far in the process. And I always thought that was quite intelligent, because ultimately, you don't want to create a test that people fail because of the test. You want to get the most accurate signal on that person as possible, and then make a decision with it as full a picture, rather than, I always try and work out, are you measuring the thing, or is the process getting in the way of that?
Yeah.
And I think often people end up confusing the two. And I sort of say to hiring managers, I say okay, but is it a negative signal or is it a lack of signal? Can you discern between the two? And I think providing feedback actually gives you the ability to say, hey, in the last one, we didn't observe strong enough communication skills, and then set the bar higher. Because if they don't meet that bar again in the next interview, it's not you, it's them.
Yeah. To Willem's point, I'm seeing candidates grow during the interview process, and actually surprised me, because I thought they were not quite going to be the right candidate, and all of a sudden they become the right candidate, and they're feeding off of the feedback that we're giving.
Which is a great signal.
Yeah,
right?
I'm a huge champion for preparation for candidates. Like you say, it shouldn't be a puzzle that's unsolvable and you just get lucky. You need that accuracy.
But I'm also a little bit worried about the recruitment industry, because I'm also kind of now in the go-to-market scene, and if you see kind of the tools and the tech that's kind of getting built there, for the automation of things, and also kind of the builders, kind of building in the open. In recruitment, it's still kind of because we're working with private data, right? We can't really show what we're doing, so there's less kind of public building. There's just a very big surge on sourcing. I think sourcing is kind of there are so many companies now trying to automate that again, and obviously we've seen that in the last, where you could just automate the sequences, but now they're trying to automate more and more and more. I think that is what are the really true AI kind of things that are being built in the recruitment?
Not those. I remember back in, I was talking to someone this the other day. I remember in 2016 at Improbable, we were one of the first companies that I knew of globally that were doing automated follow-ups and sequences and sort of personalization at some scale, and we were sending significant numbers of messages, and we were talking to folks at Google, we were talking to sort of the cutting edge companies, and we were at the front of it for a while. And people are just catching up now, and so the AI tools that are coming out now, but
they're just wrappers around.
They're not really AI.
That's the point.
They're not really AI. What it is everyone looks at it and goes, oh, it's a sourcing problem, as though what the world needs is more spam. And so it's how can I send a badly personalized message to a larger volume of people more quickly? That is not work. That's not going to work. And there is an absolute half-life on how long people are going to put up with, hey, I noticed that you went to school and that you did this thing. Wouldn't it be great if you bought this thing I'm selling? It's shite. And I think that the value of personalization is approximating to zero now. And I think that in the next year, I think delivering an email like that will be close to impossible, right? And I think that if maybe a second company here is go and build a thing that sits in Gmail and stops people you don't know emailing you, right? That's probably $1 billion business, right? And so all Google have got to do is turn a button on for that.
Yeah,
I think the way that I've looked at it for the last few years is the old myth of great candidates not applying for jobs isn't true. I don't think it's ever been true. And you can get those folks' eyes on your job in other ways now. People are browsers. They will sit on Zillow and just look at whether the grass is greener in someone else's garden and look at the houses, and likewise they'll just browse through jobs. And if you do your job right, you can actually get those eyes to turn into candidates, and in a way that you're getting those jobs served directly into their inboxes just through discoverability and intelligent writing on that side. And one, you're getting rid of the spam. You don't need to rely on that. Two, you're turning passive into active, which is a big challenge. But But when I'm seeing those models work, we've deployed that model, minimal sourcing, maximum focus on inbound. You can see success. Hiring is cheaper. I think, I can see that the quality is there because we can measure quality of hire internally on Ashby, and you're driving a range of talent in that you wouldn't have access and would never respond to any of those messages. Certainly not in mails in LinkedIn.
It's one of those, I mean, like, I agree and I disagree. I think that yes, it is possible to do that, and I think that the future of outbound is really more like activated inbound.
Yeah.
Whereas like there is latent interest, you've built latent interest, and then you create the right triggers that cause somebody to inbound you, right? And so make no mistake, that isn't chance. Like, you've set things up to do that. I do think that I think over the next 5 years, you will see a huge number of many, many more smaller companies. And I think actually the ability for each of those companies to do what you're saying diminishes massively, just because the amount of time. If there are, just in the last year, the number of startups that have merged in London is massive.
Yeah.
And so if you're, I'm talking to some candidates at the moment, there are 10,000 open software engineer roles in London right now. No matter what you do, it is not possible for you to review all of those. It's just not possible. And so it's how do companies that don't have the resources, that are probably going to be small by design moving forward, how do they also compete on that stage as well? Because I think that discoverability becomes even more difficult. I do agree that it is about how do you switch from being a cold message to being a warm message.
Yeah.
And like, how do you build your brand? How do you build your messaging? How do you present yourself in a way to do that? I completely agree. But I think if everyone does it, it's the same as no one doing it. And so how do you stand out in a world of that competition? In the same way with messages, right? If every company in the world can send 1,000 highly personalised messages a day, it's the same as no one doing it, because you just can't. You're just not.
I think that's already happening, right? Like, if you see the amount
100%.
if you see the amount of messages that are going out already.
But they're garbage as well, right?
Yeah. But they're still good recruiters who use it to an advantage. I think that is, I think it just amplifies good work, and it also amplifies shitty work. Whatever tool we use, kind of like to automate things, etc.
I think we're in a phase now where like there's still people who do new things now will still gain an advantage for a period of time, but the half-life of that advantage will be eaten away as it becomes increasingly automated. Yeah. I think sourcing is always seen as the problem, because it's a bit like, I've always said this, it's like what sales and marketing had 5 years ago, recruitment kind of get a version of. Yeah. And like you said at the beginning, like, it's interesting to see founders without recruitment backgrounds coming into the market. Well, they look at it like a B2B problem, and they're like, oh, well, like, this is logical, a process should look like this, and it's like, yes, it should,
but it never goes like that.
But you are dealing with two sets of illogical things,
yes,
right, and a whole host of other things. And the reality is that there is like, I call it interview theatre. There is a process by which a candidate comes in and presents a version of themselves. There is a process by which a company presents a version of itself. And like, both of those things happening mean that a logical process will not work.
I agree. Yeah. That's also why I find it funny when these founders shout that they're going to fix the whole ecosystem while we've been in it. Kind of like, I think once we have kind of like AGI kind of like things working, like when you hire kind of like those kind of things, then maybe you can fully automate that through, because there's not a maybe.
I think it gets worse.
When you play the tape forward on all of these things, the only thing I see is we're going to need more humans.
Yeah.
You talk about the 10,000 software engineering jobs that are open. Ergo, you need more recruiters or more people in TA in order to service that number of open jobs. But then you've got the plethora of applications coming in. The vast majority of those are not suited to the work or don't exist.
How do you see that now? Because I remember talking to companies, while I was at Atomico, and they were saying, look, previously we'd get 50 applications for this role. We've had 1,000. And so obviously, like, there's building, lots of companies are building tools to screen CVs. There's a question mark over, how that has to be done in a very intelligent way. Yeah. I know that you guys have some functionality.
Two different things. There's augmenting the human, and then there's selection of the human.
100%.
We're not touching the second bit.
Okay, interesting. Well, let's go into that in a second. But there's this side of, like, there is now a much greater volume, and so one of the plays that I saw emerging as we founded Dex was that basically you've got this arms race where you've got a candidate that's now armed with essentially ChatGPT that will say whatever it thinks it needs to say to get you through an application process, and like, being charitable, it's helping you optimize your CV. The other end of that spectrum is it's fraud.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like, I think that it's way closer to that second than it is to the former. And so, we've got milkmen being turned into like, architects.
Yep.
And so for me, it's like that's one side of the equation. And then the other side of the equation, seeing companies rush to implement AI as some sort of like defense to that. That to me is very obviously a race to absolutely nowhere, right? Like that's an arms race that just keeps going and it becomes cat and mouse.
If you get 5,000 applications within a minute of a job opening, and your AI says all 5,000 of those are qualified within a minute of that job opening, you're going to need more humans to sift through the rubble, right? That's again when you play the tape forward. What I'm seeing at the coalface of this, because I try and keep myself hands-on as much as possible still, because it's a key signal for the business, is the vast majority of those AI-driven applications, whether it's just the writing of the resume or whether it's true fraud, look the same for the job because the human is giving the same instruction to the tool. It's just a different human, but it's the same tooling. So they're producing the same body of work. We had one job
so it's sort of
where we had
each person into the same CV.
exactly everything. The whole pool is becoming homogenized, not the whole pool. There are isolated individuals out there. Of course, they're the folks who get the job. We had one job, and we use application questions a lot to determine who's human and to get real signal now.
As in like asking them to answer a
specific question. And this particular job
But that's nothing new, right?
No, absolutely. But this particular the particular job was a data engineer, and it asked about a data visualization that they were really impressed by, and we had 1,000 applications choose exactly the same data visualization. It's called wind maps, and it's just like this visualization of wind speeds around the world, and it was a beautiful thing.
What do you do with those? Like, do you blanket reject those?
You end up having to, because all their answers to all the other questions were identical as well. So
but then do you look at that application? Because obviously there's a person on the other end of it,
Sure.
and that person has decided, hey, I really want to get a job, this job, whatever. I've used this tool to help my chances of that, but actually, as a hiring manager, I would reject it.
Yeah,
I would look
and
at it
we
go,
had to.
I can't trust what's behind this now.
The resume becomes disconnected because the job title might well align to the job, but the words underneath the job title don't. They relate to other work because whatever they've deployed, and they're trying to move as fast as possible, and they're thinking that there's no human reading the resume, but the human reads it like, you've never done this work before. I
think it's interesting also with your cohort hiring kind of like strategy for some of our roles that you see, like we open up a job, like basically back to the old days, open up a job, close a job.
Batch hiring.
Yeah. And then you see in the application questions kind of like similar questions being answered in the same way, right? So I think that's nice about the cohort stuff.
It's not actually batch hiring in the old style. It's actually long list, short list, and the creation of only the very best candidates getting into the calendar time, to go slow at the beginning, to go fast later on, rather than batch days and that kind of thing. I always have to differentiate.
Yeah, sorry, no, I meant the same.
Okay, good, cool. Another example, we have this recruiter role, and one of our engineering roles is an engineer who can design. We hire engineers who are very aesthetic. Our founder Abik, he was a software engineer at Pixar on the first Transformers movie, coding the special effects. So that's kind of the mindset. And one of the questions we asked the recruiter was, how would you judge taste in the resume of a candidate who was applying for our engineer who can design role? And we like to be very practical during our interview process. And this was a written exercise. And you had people come back and they're talking about color theory and all of these things that they could use to judge the taste of the engineer behind this application. And I read their resumes and I was like, there is no way that this person has actually got the experience to judge color theory. And maybe I give this assignment to 12 people, or gave this assignment to 12 people. I had 10 identical answers who were all talking about judging color theory. I had one person who talked about color theory, but then explained why they were qualified because they were a former creative director. And then one person who had clearly written their own answer going, well, to be honest, I'm not really qualified to judge the aesthetics, but I'd look at their resume and think about how it was constructed and whether or not it's readable and et cetera, et cetera. I'd look at their LinkedIn profile, look at any other sources I can, and then perhaps this, and this. That person got the job.
Yeah. This is the bit where I pretend I know what colour theory is.
I haven't got a clue. But nor did they. But they were writing about it to try and impress me. But the person who impressed me was the person who was actually being a human, not putting their stuff. And I spoke to every single one of those people and I was like, why did you write that? First of all, tell me I'm wrong, that you actually know what colour theory is. Not one of them could answer it. And I was like, why did you put that?
This is the bit that I really just don't understand. And I think I'm trying to understand it because I want it to be a good thing, but I know the answer is like people who are using these tools, or more importantly, people that are selling these tools to people. And like, by the way, let's be honest, they're making money on the people using these tools. They're selling into desperation.
Yeah.
What's the game plan? Like, okay, I'm not qualified for this role. This thing will trick the company into thinking I am qualified. I then I get the job. Then what?
Yeah.
Because like, what if you hired this recruiter? Like, okay, brilliant. What's your theory of? Are they just going to cheat their whole way through the career? Maybe that is the answer.
I think maybe you miss out on some good recruiters. They just want to answer. Like maybe they have 5 different applications running, and they just think like, I'll just use ChatGPT to find me an answer. I think it kind of like shows a little bit of personality in there, but you might miss out on a good recruiter. Maybe I've 3 kids. Maybe I need to push this thing into.
But maybe right. But I think you're being super charitable. I don't buy it. Like I think that there are people out there that believe that they're going to trick their way.
I don't think it's tricking their way, right? Like there's obviously the tricksters, but I think it's a very small percentage of kind of like it's basically what you see on LinkedIn. And
but what's the logic? Is the logic like, okay, applying for a job is a numbers game, therefore I'm going to let something else do the numbers?
But it's not. You will only get the role that is right for you, and if you're not right for that role, you're wasting your time.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, it's the same example of that guy that had like 10 YC jobs. What's his name? If people want to fraud, like you can like, especially with highly sought after roles and kind of like
I just think it speaks to the wrong thing. I think it leans into this idea that it is a numbers game, and actually that as long as you can get your foot in the door, you'll be fine. Listen, if you get your foot in the door as a surgeon, we've got a problem.
Yeah.
Right? Like there should be barriers to entry for certain things, and that it needs to be accessible to the right people. And the thing that concerns me is that this leads to a sort of zero trust environment. It leads to an environment where now, as an employer or as a candidate, you kind of go into that process being like, is any of this real?
Yeah.
Google are talking about doing in-person interview loops again, like moving back from remote. I think that it pulls up the ladder for a lot of people, because now it becomes a call. What school did you go to? Can I verify you went to that school?
Yeah.
Where did you work? Can I get a back channel reference on you? Do I already know you? And I think that therefore, if you're not in one of those groups, you're going to get overlooked.
Yep.
I think that it also leads to a situation where it just becomes way more combative, way more adversarial, which I think leads to just poorer outcomes across the board.
It's going to get worse, because the thing that's disappearing are the entry-level jobs.
Yeah.
I don't know about you two, but I certainly went into my first job in recruiting with 0 experience, and I had to fake it until I made it. And that's kind of what we were just talking about, tricking I got the job for whatever reason and did okay from it. And
but they weren't. They didn't think they were hiring an experienced person.
Fair. They didn't get one. But those jobs are the first things that are being automated away. So where do we get the next level of employee from in 5 years' time? And then in 10 years' time, where's the middle management? And it's just going to make everything more competitive and more adversarial. The new graduates coming out of school and so on, it's a whole different landscape. It's going to be worse than 2010. Yeah. And for the next fair few years, it's going to be pretty rough.
It's interesting. So we advertised for a graduate engineer role yesterday. Mm-hmm. And I've been thinking about this problem for a long time. Right? We've watched in Western societies a steady decline in tenure within companies. Yeah. I met many years ago. I met Stephen Rose, who at the time was the CEO of Marks and Spencer's. He started in Marks and Spencer's as a tailor's assistant on the shop floor and worked his way through the organisation. If you look now, the CEO of Nike started in retail and worked all the way up to the top job. And I think that and people go, it's a generational thing. It absolutely isn't a generational thing. It's a talent management thing. Those organisations then knew that it was far easier to train somebody that you already had in the business that you knew was good to do something new than to go and hire someone new.
Yeah.
And at some point somewhere, people forgot that. And it became, instead of removing somebody internally, what I must do is I must hire someone external. And I must bring somebody over. And I think this is I think that just does, I think what that means is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It means if I'm a high performer in my organisation, it's more likely that I'm going to get layered by a mediocre sideways performer than actually get the job opportunity myself, which I think fuels then I'm going to leave, which then fuels we don't want to develop people in case they leave. And you end up with this kind of cycle that's gone on for years.
But you also make more money when you just...
Some people make more money.
Yeah,
some people,
tech, it's
but
it's
the employees, or I think some
he's talking about the employees.
Yeah, the employee. You leave because you want to make a step up, right? Because everybody's hiring sideways anyway.
Yeah, I think that I think they're tied together.
Yeah.
Right? I think you don't get the progression opportunity, and therefore pay is limited because organisations look at it quite statically. They're like, well, you're a good L2. Maybe L2 is a bad example. You're a good senior engineer. I want to keep you as a senior engineer. I don't really want you to progress. And so they're putting the needs of themselves before the needs of the employer, and not realising that all you do there is press the button on how long they're going to leave it.
Internal first is the mantra of successful companies now. And tenure is the biggest indicator of success of any employee in a SaaS startup, for example, be it in sales, engineering. You build capability and then you've got that movement, and when people can see that their career paths are going to be supported, they stay. It's fascinating, but we've got to then still build those lower level roles and create the openings there. I think apprenticeships will make a comeback. That's going to be a really interesting, so raw talent and capability competing for a certain small number of jobs where you will train and grow those individuals rather than hiring them into the entry-level position that used to exist. Companies with the right mindsets will start to build those kinds of programs again.
I think that's true. I was looking at some graduate profiles the other day, and there was a graduate I saw that, top computer science degree, top university, had done internships at a few hedge funds and was looking for roles and was considering retail and hedge funds. Mm-hmm. That's insane.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And so, there's a whole generation of talent that is actually, at risk of being wasted.
But we did a lot of graduate hiring at Improbable.
We did.
Is it completely different now? What do you see?
So when just before I left at Atomico, I spoke to somewhere in the region of 100 portfolio companies around have you got graduate roles in the portfolio? There wasn't one. There wasn't one graduate role in any discipline. And so where do those people go? And the reality is that those people, there's much higher unemployment. Those people are going into non-degree related fields. They're going into service economy, they're going into retail, they're going into other stuff. Some of them are starting companies, right? Yeah. I think the average age of founder is dropping from what I've seen in some of the YC stuff. So I do think there are avenues for more entrepreneurial activity, which I think is brilliant. But I think that, if you look at the Metas, the Googles, the PwCs, the kind of traditional large graduate employers in this country, the number of graduate roles that they are hiring for is largely diminished.
Yeah.
If you think about the cohort the cohort of graduates we hired at Improbable in 2016, 17, if I look at where they are now, you've got, they were a killer cohort.
Yeah.
Right? They are working at some of the best businesses in the world as senior engineers, principal engineers, VPs of engineering. It's not like this crop doesn't have that talent. It's that companies are looking at it and going, I don't want the risk. I don't want to take the time. And I think that it's mad.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely mad.
I don't know what it's like to do graduate hiring now because I haven't done it in a while. But in the later years at Google, we would get 10,000 applications within the first few minutes of a job opening because everyone knew when graduate hiring season was. The US new graduate software engineer role would have pre-programmed applications flowing in. And this is before AI tools on the candidate side to do those applications for you. It must be in the hundreds of thousands of applications in the first few minutes of these roles opening. So it's an enormous burden on the business to make those kinds of hires as well.
But that's Google, I think, if you
Sure. Well, we posted one yesterday. We've had on the...
Yeah, what's your success rate?
It's been 24 hours.
We've
had somewhere in a day, we've had somewhere in the region of 70 applications. I haven't looked this morning. That's people that have spoken to Dex. So people that have called up and had a conversation with Dex, about their preferences, skills, abilities. There'll be a much larger number of those in the pipeline somewhere that either haven't had the call yet or or whatever.
So basically you open up the job and then Dex...
For this role...
Your Dex product is kind of like speaking to them.
For this role.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And I think it's just so that we can do two things. It's one, so we can handle the volume because we're a small team and we've got to do so much. But secondly, it's also that gives those individuals an opportunity to put across their story in a much more nuanced, much more interested, like much more kind of informative way than two sides of A4. And so I think that what it allows us to do is make a much more informed decision with a richer set of data. I don't think it works in all circumstances. I actually think it would be probably not very successful in experienced hiring.
Yeah. Because people don't want to invest the time.
So there are a bunch of companies emerging right now where they're building like a voice agent or an agent that will sit on top of an Ashby, or even Ashby. I imagine you guys have had conversations about it internally. But there are a bunch of these products where it's like, we'll be the first screen.
I think it just depends what kind of, there's a threshold, right, where you want to put in that time to, like, I would do it for like a dream job.
It depends where the market is.
Yeah.
If it's a really hot market, good candidates aren't going to do that. Not in large numbers, right? Because ultimately, I think that if you're an in-demand candidate in a hot market, I think that
you're just
a company saying, "Oh, yeah, we don't actually have the time to talk to you. Would you mind chatting to the refrigerator on the way in?"
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty negative signal on like how you treat people in the business.
I do think so.
I think it depends on kind of like there's a nuance to the situation. I think that. When we were getting investment for Dex, people were like, oh, you should build a product like the one I'm describing, which is not what we're doing. You should build a product for for blue collar workers, because it doesn't really matter. I just think it's gross.
Yeah.
Like, I think the idea that what you should do is you should treat a whole section of the economy guys, you don't actually matter. So what would
you see a lot of large players moving in that direction though?
Yeah.
We've actually been running an experiment recently on 3 different roles around the world. Using a third-party tool that has an integration with Ashby that does a text-based interview where the person then records their answers live, and then the next question comes up, and there's a Q&A capability to it, and so on. But we're giving the candidate the choice
to do it,
and we're explaining that it's an experiment.
Yeah, I think I like.
Guess what the uptake is?
Yeah, I imagine it's pretty high.
You haven't seen this. So.
I haven't seen it, but I would think if you give the choice, I think people will be opting in more for that they have a chance to present themselves through the text-based stuff. I think
it's nearly 33%.
Yeah,
uptake.
So a third opt in.
A third are opting in, and a lot of that is because they want to be part of the experiment, because they want the uniqueness of it.
Yeah.
We also explain that you can go and have the human conversation afterwards, so you can double track.
But this is after screen, right?
No, this is the first conversation. So
and could they
post
fail
resume
that and not have the human conversation?
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
So there's no resume check.
Resume review is done.
Okay, so
this is the shortlist, and the shortlist gets the choice.
Yeah.
They can either book the time in the calendar, which can be a few days out, or they can do it at their convenience using the tool.
It's the same psychology as sending someone a Calendly link and being like, pop yourself in there, right? It's the ultimate. It's like the idea of like, what is the relationship I have with this person? Is there like a weird power dynamic? Am I being made to feel like I'm important, or am I being made to feel like I'm sort of inconsequential? And I think that the majority of hiring processes make people feel inconsequential and small, and they make them feel without power. They make them feel like they're being kind of assessed unfairly, which is why I think you see so many people jumping into these tools that kind of get one back. Well, if you're going to treat me like that, I'll do the same. And I think that's the mindset that these companies are tapping into.
Yeah.
I think that offering people choice and saying, look, here are the options. I think the smart thing to do there would be to say, you can have the interview now with the AI, or we can schedule in a week to speak with a human. I think you get more than 30%. But the interesting thing to me is not that some people will try it. Of course they will. I think that again it falls into one of those things where it's like, for how long? Because in a year that's not going to be novel.
Yep.
And I think there'll be a bit of a backlash.
The pass-through rates are identical. Dropout rates and pass-through rates aggregated are identical. So that's quite interesting. And the other thing we're doing is we're still offering 10 minutes of Q&A with a human, so that you can have the bi-directional conversation. So we're not replacing that element of the human interaction. We're just creating more capacity in the limited number of humans we have, thanks to technology. So it's been fun.
Jim, I have a hot take I've wanted to discuss with you for a while.
Go for it.
I think the recruitment pipeline is the worst thing that's happened to recruitment ever.
The recruitment pipeline?
The idea of treating it as a pipeline where you have as many people in the top as possible and manage
I did a talk on this
it all the way down.
2 years ago.
I think it's a disaster.
Look, you've already called it out, the analogy between sales and recruiting. There is one massive difference between the two. In sales, more pipeline means more shiny logos at the end. more new business.
I actually don't think it does. I think it's wrong in sales too. But I
Fine,
think it's more obvious in talent.
But in recruiting, too much pipeline is cost and inefficiency, and ultimately burn of cash, right? You only need a certain number of applications in order to fill the role, and you can optimize all of your processes to make that number smaller and smaller and smaller, to get to the same outcome. Less is more. So yeah, I hate the concept of pipeline. The whole exercise we do is use the data to figure out the math behind what do we need to do in order to create pipe that creates an outcome of 3 times more than what we need to create choice being the biggest driver of quality, to avoid desperation.
Look, the reality is, to fill one role, you need one person.
Very true.
And the difference between, for me, in my experience working with many recruiters over the years, the difference between an average recruiter and a great one is they can look at a pipeline and they can go, those ones.
Those ones, plural.
And I don't know why. Yeah, okay. But I mean, they know from looking at, because the reality is, in a pipeline that is, as is traditionally done in both sales, recruiting, and every other funnel, a large number of that pipeline is not real. It's either like not really going to be right. It's kind of like it's there because you want to make a purpose. I need pipeline coverage. I want to kind of give myself enough shots at goal.
Yeah.
It speaks to a process where you're not really in control of what's happening. You don't really understand why things are. You're just throwing shit at a wall and seeing what sticks.
Qualified pipeline is key.
And the reality is that for both the candidate and for the company, this is a stat that doesn't get measured well enough. I talked to a founder and they're like, I want to double engineering this year. I'm like, okay, how many engineers have you got? They're like, we're 10. Okay, cool, 220. And what's your pass-through rate at the moment? It's X. I said, cool. So for you to double, you're basically going to do this much less work this year. And that there's a tipping point where it's like you actually are better off not hiring that role and you'll deliver more for the capacity. And I don't think people really understand the weight that hiring in its current form takes on a business, which I know is a topic that you've covered a few times, but it's baffling to me that people don't get that.
But you could also double engineering with the same amount of work you did this year by halving your pass-through rate, by making yourself twice as effective at hiring. And less is more. That's the constant piece. Great recruiters can see quality, but if they don't shrink the pipeline first, they don't get the opportunity to review the whole of the pool. And statistically, if you're only looking at the first 10%, the best candidate, whoever they happen to be, and it is hard to tell who the best one is, otherwise we'd all be out of a job, statistically is unlikely to be in that first 10%, as is the best person from any demographic. The logic of small numbers. So you have to build process that looks at the whole of the pool in order to be effective to move through. Then you need that accuracy at that point. That's where I'm starting with that engineering leader. And I have a lot of fun when customers are reaching out to me saying, we've got a double engineering, what do you do? Well, first things first, you plug all the numbers into the recruiter planner and then you show the engineering leader how many hours of interviewing based on their current process they're now going to cost the business. All of a sudden it's like, yeah, we're not going to do this for 6 months. Or they start to drip feed, it's not going to be front loaded, all of these different things. So, this is the stuff I love, but quality over quantity is the key mantra all the way through all of this.
So basically, remember the web tooling team at Improbable, I built that whole team by sourcing, nobody applied anyway, because there weren't any applicants for back in the day in London. So is that I could spot based on some GitHub activity, what they were shipping, if they were right for the team that we're trying to build. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't a lot of pipeline. I also, I think it encumbers me when I have a lot of inbound because it gets too messy. So do you think that's then the alternative? You build your own pipeline and then you have a limited pipeline to work with? Because I think it's just the volume of there's so much. I've got 200 applicants and we treat it as a good thing, which I think is maybe
Yeah, I don't think it's a good thing.
No.
I think there's a lot of moving parts in there, and you can't really isolate one because then you've got to kind of account for the others. But I think the reality is that a really great recruitment process activity is where you get to spend as much time as possible with the most relevant, interested, motivated candidates as humanly possible.
Yeah.
And in order to do that and not have the business fall over, that necessitates that it's a small number. And so I would rather speak to 3 people, spend more time, with them wanting to as well, spend more time with them to really establish is this the right person, and then hire that one. And if that means you speak to 3, you spend 4.5 hours with each of them, and then you hire one of them. That's better than spending 30 minutes with 1,000 people and then trying to run them through a week.
So flip this around the other way. You've got 10,000 jobs in London, and all of them are looking for the super special engineer. And I had this conversation with someone who had just joined a company. They were from a VC background, just joined a company, and they wanted to hire a sourcing leader to do an executive search type hiring process for software engineers. So they would pick the very best people.
Sounds like a VC talent person.
Source only those people, talk to this curated list, and so on. I was like, that isn't going to happen, because to get the one candidate, you're going to have to talk to or generate, for argument's sake, 1,000, because that talent is so in demand, and you don't have the employment brand, the velocity or any of these things to attract that top talent.
Candidly, you just don't have the data.
Yeah.
You like, it's not like this is where exec search people fall down when it comes to like IC recruiting. It's like, oh, you go and find the best VPs of sales, in Europe, and you go, yes, there's 50 of them. You can know them all by name, and like you will know because where they work, their accolades, they speak publicly. There's data about them. Like it's they have reached a point where they are visible. Who's the best full stack engineer in the UK? Nobody knows. There is no way to know. You will not spot that person on paper. They probably don't have a LinkedIn, and like they're probably working for an organisation you haven't heard of.
Yep.
And so
they never answer their telephone.
And they're not answering the phone, and they don't want to talk to you.
No.
And they're busy. So it's just a different. I totally agree, right? And that's what we talk about. This like activated inbound. Like, how do you get in front of that person? How does that person become aware about you? How do you understand the proposition for that person? And by the way, for a different company, probably a different person.
Yeah,
sure. I was talking. I think it was a Brainfood Hung Lee's thing recently, and I was talking about the value of your internal database and those relationships, and how I think we've lost the skill of networking that we used to have. And I'm not talking the spoof networking of calling reception and saying you've got a parcel for so and so. Can they put me all of this stuff, right? But there still has to be a way of you having your personal relationships with people to get introduced to other people, likely through electronic means rather than by voice, to try and tap them into, we've got this role, we think you'd be ideal for it, here are our data points, would you be interested in engaging with us, here is the CEO of the company or the CTO of the company as that first conversation, we're not going to waste your time. LinkedIn has kind of taken away that skill because of everybody being available, and if you're not on LinkedIn you don't exist. That's what I think is coming back, because the cost of access to LinkedIn, be it LinkedIn Recruiter or repackaged LinkedIn data going to AI companies and being sold at a premium, whichever way that world goes, you're not going to be able to access that with the startup funding. So you're going to have to build the database, and that's going to be part of the value of your company, I think, moving forward. I think TA becomes more important.
100%. I think one of the things I took from Atomico that was so great was this idea of like relationships over transactions.
Yeah.
And I think what we've seen is this idea that networking has become highly, I think it's always been to some degree, but it's become highly transactional, and it's actually missed the strength of relationships. I think one of the things that I've enjoyed the most in the last 6 months is that actually going back and actually I've always tried to invest in the relationships I've had with people, but like investing in those relationships and working with those people, and it's way more fun. It's a much better life when you actually get to hang out with people you like and help them. And so I think that if we can get back to a world where I think AI can help us focus on the relationship and not the transaction, I think that's the thing I'm most excited about. I think it's the idea that, like, particularly in recruitment, the only thing that matters is the personal connection between the people involved.
I agree.
Everything else is irrelevant. And if we can build systems that allow us to spend more time there and less time doing the other stuff, that's how you get to good results.
Yeah.
It's what I've been doing with our customer breakfasts. Basically, I do dinners. I think if they fall more under transaction.
Do you host events?
I do events.
My invite's in the...
He's the dinner man.
But basically,
but somehow you're not on his list.
If you think about that, like, the dinners are pretty transactional. I don't want to give people work to do at the dinner or kind of like, do round tables, etc. I just want people to connect, but it's still transactional. I think in the customer breakfasts, what I do is I bring the right people together who are working on a similar problem in Ashby. Kind of like, I let one person present, but what I've seen as the outcome of it is that they start building connections. They meet, like, there's now a small RecOps group of people in Europe that have been to my breakfasts. They kind of like now mingle, work on Ashby related stuff. So I think that is also something that I value way more is in making sure that human connection is there.
It's that community, that connection. At the end of the day, we're human beings. What do we want to do? We want to talk to and connect with people. And I think every single piece of software that I'm seeing
it's
at the moment is moving us in the wrong direction. And that's why they won't work. Because at the end of the day, what they're doing is they're trying to push in the opposite direction of human nature. Yeah. And like that is literally pushing water uphill.
It's what I'm talking about tomorrow at Breakfast. It's the difference between assistive AI augmenting the human and the selective AI selecting the human.
Yeah.
And the first one is still human-centric, human in the loop. It's removing the work that got in the way of the human relationship.
Yeah.
And for a TA person, our job satisfaction comes from impacting people positively. And if we can get more of that, thanks to technology, all the better. The other piece...
I mean, not only will it not work, they'll ban it before it gets the chance.
Yeah. All of those things.
It's kind of moot anyway.
Yes.
Guys, this has been super fun. Thank you for coming in. I'd love to kind of run this back and do another chat. There's a few more topics I think we could cover really well. But thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thanks for inviting us.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Very good.